Thank you for tuning in to the World Builder's Anvil, episode 278. Why creating rules is so important when creating fiction.
Don't know where to start building your fantasy world?
Do you need more? Does it make sense?
Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination.
This is the place where we will prime your mind.
Now, it's time to heat up the forge.
Break out the mithril ingots and hammer.
Welcome to the World Builder's Anvil. I'm Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And I'm Michael Miller.
Let's sup from the muck of Java and build. Disappointed as always, I'm Jeffrey W. Ingram.
I'm a little surprised you're disappointed. I am Michael Miller.
Surprised.
Why are you disappointed?
Not at all. Not at all.
So you're just messing with me again.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
I have to get it in. I have to be nice to you next episode.
Yeah, actually, so I might be in for it. I didn't even consider that. I was about to say this is like, the penultimate for me.
That's right.
If you guys haven't been paying attention and marking every single episode that has been so awesome,
which we're sure you do,
which because of my presence has only been the last 199 episodes. So next episode,
I'm pretty impressed. I mean, essentially, we're only down about 3,000% off.
About 3,000.
The trajectory of the first 79 episodes for downloads. So
you know what? Though, tell the truth. You do know that there was an escalating growth once I joined. Like you've admitted that.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Come on. Be true. Well, okay. Be truthful next episode.
Next episode, I'll be truthful.
You can break my stones in this one. Be truthful next one. Before we get into it, let us. Speaking of growth, let's shout out. There have been a ton of new people who have. What are you laughing about?
I just had very bad. I just felt glad for the audience that
filthy again.
They only get audio. They don't see the video when you say stuff like that.
I didn't do anything.
Oh, right. Okay.
So. Just shush, let me get through it, huh? We're going to shout out people who have joined the closed Facebook group. If you want to join the closed Facebook group, go to Facebook. What is it? .groups.
Facebook.com/groups/undercroft.
That's
this will be your quiz next episode.
I'm still gonna mess up 200 episodes in, and I still mess up the closed Facebook group. Just look for Undercroft, and you'll find us.
That's right.
We're the Fantasy World Builders Undercroft is the closed Facebook group. So a bunch of people have joined recently, and we're gonna shout them out, and their names are. So thank you so much for joining. We for a while now we only do first names. We don't do people's last names. We did last names for a while, but whatever. So thank you for joining, Barry. That could be George. That could be Jorg. I knew a guy named Jorg, although the last name is Torres, and I just said I wouldn't say last names, so it could be pronounced differently. I'm so sorry. We should maybe.
We are a failure.
I just said I would not say last names. Anyway, okay. David, Josh, James, Joe, Gary, Danielle, Matt. Is that Sicily?
I believe so.
I think that's Sicily.
So
Samuel,
like Cecil, but with a Y.
Yeah. Samuel, Jim, Lindsay, and Sarah. Thank you so much for joining the closed Facebook group, guys.
Which the reason Michael always does this, in case you've been wanting to ask, which I'm sure you have, like, why doesn't Jeff ever do this? Because I have an undeniable belief and strictly logical argument that every name is pronounced Bill. And
I've been trying to tell him that this is not accurate for years. And
I'm like, Bill, you're wrong.
He's like, Bill, shut up. Yeah.
Michael in my vocabulary is actually a cuss word. So that's why we sometimes explicit.
That's awesome. And I'm totally okay with it.
Yeah. So today, this is sort of going all the way back to episode 4. It's that I wanted to touch on again.
It's episode 4 is one of what I like to refer to as the dark episodes. So anything before episode 79,
as I like to call them, BM.
The dark, yes, BM before Michael.
But essentially,
PM.
I do have to get a domain that's a .bm at some point. Fiber.bm maybe.
Fiber.bm.
That has to be used.
It could just be Jeff's BM.
Yeah, I thought of that, but Kristen said no to that one. So.
Oh, come on. You can get me at Jeff's BM.
Me at Jeff's BM. I feel bad for whatever country that is. Not because they should feel bad for where they are, but because there's a lot of people with childish humors who probably make fun of it every time they see it.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt.
It's probably like a much better place to visit. Probably somewhere like Bermuda or something like that.
My company actually got the suffix green, which I thought was cool. I didn't know that was a thing now. Like, can you just get custom suffixes now?
You can do custom suffixes now, and there are a bunch. Like, you can get a .ninja site if you want.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so that was the other thought, is Jeff.ninja, and that would be like evidence of how cool I really am.
You'd be like Jeff at email.ninja. Like, that would work, right?
That would work. But no, just to get Jeff.ninja. Or JeffIngram.ninja would be okay too. Okay.
Yeah, that'd be okay.
That'd be okay.
So we're going back, we're digging deep, and I don't know if anyone's noticed it, but I think I should out us that one of the things that we do is we sometimes go back to the well. We take a look at old episodes, some of which, in this case, are episodes that were before I was part of the show, and we redo them. Sometimes we redo episodes that we've
just
done.
As we forget. Well, other times it's intentional.
Sometimes it's we've got new perspectives on it, or we want to take a different approach to the subject. So, we'll take something that's similar to an episode we've done before and then just do it a little different.
That, and there's 300, approaching 300 episodes. There are people who come in. It's a huge ask to be like, okay, and for next week, listen to all the episodes. I mean, you guys be a real jerk to use that as an ask, even though I think we've jokingly said that, but we're semi-serious. If you want to do it, please feel free.
I think it's one of the things where it's like great to cherry pick. If you've got a specific thing that you're working on, you can probably go back and find like 4 or 5 specific episodes that we might be able to help out on.
And really, if you're thinking about what is the core, we talk about with world building, because sometimes get lost and the banter. But there was a mind map I put together when the show started, and essentially,
I think that was
go to the newsletter on Gardul.com. That's GARDUL.com and sign up. I believe it's still the free giveaway. To show how often I've updated that. But if you go there, you can get the free mind map, which is literally, it's a loose mind map of essentially what I like to think about when I world build. And so I like it because it kind of lets me hit all of the topics, but it's not a checklist where, a lot of times I see people get into this idea where they have to like check off, okay, now I'm to the kingdoms section of my world. I have 200 countries. I have to start going through and filling out all of the kingdom information for all 200 countries. And, and that's one of the places people get lost a lot in world building. And that's why I'm not a huge fan of checklists, even though I understand why they're good too. But, you got to use them as inspiration and realize how close they are to what you use. But that's a completely different episode. I'm getting off a topic here. So let's get into rules. And we have done, Michael and I have done some deep episodes into magic, which is one of the rules that we'll get to here. I'll put links to them in the show notes, where we've talked about we've built magic systems. I don't know if we built one, but we've talked about magic systems.
Think we did build one.
And we had like a 3-episode series on, like my 7 rules of magic systems or whatever. Sort of my answer to other people's rules who are really popular, well-known writers. So why mention them? But the idea is with rules, first, really what's a rule to start off with, and for me, a rule, it's a macro level thing. It's a big picture question. And I like to come up with them, not so much, if you listen to the show, I'm not a huge fan of trying to hit hyper scientific reality. Which I think is sort of a disease that's starting to seep from hard science fiction into fantasy and lighter science fiction. because people think that's what people say when they say this book isn't realistic. They think they're talking about the science of it, but it's really, my theory is it's more about the character interactions and how they fit into the world, how things feel, is what people say when they make the statement something's not realistic. Of course, there are some people who are hardcore science geeks or think that they are, and they make assumptions, but you can't please everyone.
I think it's two things. I think it's one, the internet. We can blame the internet for part of it.
Of course, yeah.
You can jump on the internet and you can look up how certain things, if you're not into hard science, you can be like, I wonder if that actually is true, and you can look it up quickly and be like, oh no, that totally wouldn't happen.
And then you hope you're on the right site that actually has the right information.
Well, right, there's that.
Depending on the topic, yeah.
And the other thing is, I think what you're talking about is when it's like, oh, that doesn't feel right, or that doesn't look right, or that doesn't sound realistic, or whatever. I think that leans into when you either consciously or subconsciously pick up on an inconsistency.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, this character has been X way for all this time, and there has not been a definitive moment that created character growth to have them go a different way.
Yeah.
So why are they going such a different way without reason?
And my theory is, most of the time when people are talking about things that are not realistic in a work, they mean the second version. The first versions, what a lot of world builders get stuck on because they're worried about the world being realistic, and it's not the right version to get stuck on. But I do like, I am a science geek. I do like to think about science. It's a lot of the psychology I get into mentally, because for me, it's all about building the patterns, so it's like, I do like to think about science and how our universe works versus the fictional universes. So that's where this idea of rules came up with in my brain. And they're not necessarily hard and fixed metric style rules where it's like, okay, E equals MC squared is the theory of relativity, and I have to run everything through E equals MC squared to figure out if it works. I don't care. I don't go to that detail. It's big picture items that I like to use, and one, it's to help bring consistency. So like if I have a deviation in a magic system, where I define, and I might not share it in the books, but if I start using magic in a book or a story in a certain way, whenever I come up with things that are related to magic, does it pass my magic rules? Does it make sense? Is it consistent with the system I came up with? If I can't go yes or no, then I assume no, and I try and stay away from it, or I change it around a little bit to make it fit in with the rules, these big picture rules that I'm coming up with for my universe. They can't break the rules. So beyond consistency, they create limits too. And I think I got this from the GURPS Space book. I'm not 100% positive, but
big fan.
Yeah, it's a great book if you do science fiction and GURPS. It's a good book if you just like to do science fiction gaming, and or you want to know more about how to build solar systems. It's really a very good book. But the thing I got from there that I liked was, be very careful on, if you do a spacefaring campaign, how spaceship travel works. If you give people the idea of like warp technology, like you think of in Star Trek, they can literally go off faster than the speed of light in any direction. Hope you're prepared. If you do wormholes, you can have the faster than light travel, but you can have a bit more control on where they end up. Or in theory, you could just BS it, be like, okay, the first system they run into is this system. But you have to consider though, like if they can move much faster than the speed of light, they can go any direction. They can very quickly map out your entire galaxy. You're probably not going to be ready for that. So I like to think about what are the limits, on rules, like, is there ocean travel? If not, why or how do I prevent it? Which Michael has run into. There's shallow sea travel when he's played in my world, but not deep sea travel.
The maelstrom.
The maelstrom, yeah, you just don't want to do it, and there is actually an exception to that rule.
Well, I was actually gonna. Are you gonna? I didn't read through all the show notes. I read through some of them because again, you just gave them to me. I'd like to let the record show.
2 years ago.
Very, yeah, right.
All these show notes, he always lies, were already back when he started in episode 79.
No, that's not true. That's a fabrication. What I was going to say is, are you going to get into exceptions, or can we talk about exceptions right now?
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think that like creating a world rule is really the big thing that we're talking about, and rules are meant to be broken. They're not meant to be stomped all over and disrespected. But
but that's usually like the beginning of it, like the end of a long story arc. One of the great ways to develop a sequel is you pick one of the basic rules that have become obvious to the people engaging and break it, or apparently break it. And that becomes the guide for the next story, the next big story series. I think Dawn Metcalf taught me that.
She taught me that.
Yeah.
I'm still sad that there will probably not be a trilogy to her first book, but it was designed as a trilogy, and I'm aware of the story, and it is so genius.
Yep.
So genius.
Sometimes there isn't going back. Okay. So we talked a little bit about what rules are, and the warning here when you start creating rules, don't try and create a list of all the rules for your universe. Create ones that you need to remember. So like magic systems, right? And for me, it's how does it vary? So like if I decided I wanted to build a world without friction, I would have a note that there's no friction on the world. Now, that could be problematic for actual interactions on the world, but, I would be able to then track it. I wouldn't advise anyone to actually do that. That is just sort of an old joke I got from my high school physics class where, I actually asked the physics professor, I'm like, how come we always do this in worlds without friction? And then they're like, because the math's easier. I'm like, oh, okay.
Well, the funny thing that's actually how electrical theory works too. Like when you're talking about circuitry in electrical theory, you're always talking about it in the perfect circuit where there is no resistance, unless you're using resistance as as part of the equation. So you're talking about I forget oh my gosh, it's been so long since I talked about this. I don't remember the exact terminology. It's like a perfectly inductive circuit or something like that. I honestly don't remember because it's so long since.
The perfect circuit. It sounds like a new age rock band.
It does sound. It was the name of my my high school band. Anyway, the concept of it is if you take real quick science. If you take an electrical power source and an alternating current power source, and you give it a pathway to ground, it's immediately going to annihilate the circuit because it has no load. It's just a pathway to ground. So what happens is if you touch those two wires together, they explode. What's actually occurring is the electrons are traveling so fast through that copper that the friction of the electrons annihilates the copper. Now it happens at the speed of energy, which is damn near the speed of light. So it happens so quickly that it occurs to the human eye and experience as an explosion. But that's not actually what's occurring. It's tons and tons and tons of electrons powering through a nearly perfect circuit. It's perfect enough,
which is why they use copper, because
it's perfect enough. It's perfect enough until the copper gets annihilated. Well, the thing is, it's an interesting contradiction because you have to have connectivity and something that's conductive, but it also needs to have resistance to hold the load.
Or else it's gone as soon as it dissipates, because it would be moving the speed of light at that point. It's just gone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, segue. It's just something.
And I'm just going to say the word Kelvin to sound more sciencey.
Okay. That's like Bo Burnham's whole bit on arpeggios. He's like, you don't have to play the piano good. Just drop the word arpeggio a lot. People are impressed.
Okay. So now moving a little bit more into what are the areas I like to talk about, or I like to review. And just because I'm a science nerd, and once again, this is not a checklist. These are areas of inspiration for people to think about. But think laws of science. and not all of them. You might not get into the conservation, or you might, conservation theory, but it's like, if you're doing that space campaign, can things travel faster than the speed of light? You could argue in a system where, in a low space system or whatever, people couldn't travel faster than the speed of light. So then you have to worry about, how do you travel really long distances? Do you have a really big spaceship with ecosystems of living things on them? Or do you have people frozen? It leads you to things to think about, and you have to develop in your world, which is the thing I like about them. And it also thinks of ways you can limit what happens in your world. Or a great thing, two is like, you got different rules for different people. So, and look to see how they develop differently. So, and I forget, this must be a Gym 6 discussion I had once, talking about.
It sounds like a gym discussion.
Faster than light travel, where normally in games it shows up where, a lot of people put a lot of time and energy developing engines so that they can travel at warp speed or whatever your faster than light travel mechanism is. But the interesting thing is, throw in, what would a race look like if they had really long lives, or like, say, I think it's a lizard is what we were talking about, because you could basically have almost no energy input and expend almost nothing, and just say almost freeze themselves, so that they could be launched in a spacecraft that it'll take really long to get to where it's going. Mm-hmm. Then when it gets there, maybe it has super powerful weapons because they haven't spent any time developing ways to cryogenically freeze or to move quickly through space, so that they have a really long pattern of thinking, because they have time. And maybe they could build really strong weapons. Maybe they start building the weapons once they leave, or as well too, if they have a really long lifespan. How are they going to vary from a race that has, they spend a lot of time working and develop these really complicated, faster than light drives, versus someone that just needs a little bit of thrust at the beginning, doesn't even need any more thrust, because they get to, say, near light speed. They turn off the engines, save the rest of fuel for when they get there. Mm-hmm. So,
well, I mean, are they going to have enough fuel to descend that speed?
Mm-hmm. Well, exactly. Maybe they don't. Maybe their plan is they're going to eject onto, like, your space station, and what changes in that time that they're traveling there that they don't know about. So there's lots of things you can play with by taking, and don't go hunt down esoteric theories of science. Just do the ones that you know, and if you don't know any, maybe stay more away from here. But you have gravity, you have physics, quantum physics, and it doesn't have to be accurate. Look at, like, Ant-Man. It's made up.
Ant-Man is fun, but they break their own rules all the time.
Of course, they say because it's quantum realm, and quantum rules are much different, but because it's at a level that we can't really observe. So who knows?
Well, no, not even. I won't get into it. I could. It's a fun movie. That's all it is.
It's a fun movie, but quantum science itself is very complicated. My point being, you don't have to be right, especially if you're doing fantasy. But maybe you have a way where people can travel long distances, through quantum space, and it's made up, it's an astral projection, because they can travel into the supernatural realm, and that's how they can get long distance, which we've talked about in one of our last builds, which I can't even remember anything more than that at this point. It was a fairy thing. A fairy less build that we were doing. But one I love is conservation, where a system is enclosed at a certain level. So, like, if you're healing someone, that means life or life force is leaving something else. And that's one that gets played with in fantasy a lot. And I don't know if the people come at it because of the laws of conservation, but maybe they do.
Watch the show Pushing Daisies. Absolutely fantastic show that does exactly that.
Yep. and it doesn't last for long. Speed of light, we've already talked a little bit about that. Don't want to go back there. Relativity, and that's one of those things where there's a lot of science on what we think happens as you approach a singularity, which is a place of super high mass, but typically, very small. So like you have an atom that contains all of the mass of the rest of the galaxy. And yes, I'm BSing through it, but that's the idea, right? Is a lot of mass. Think of a billion suns, you've been in a very small space. And remember, relativity is like dealing with time as you approach it, and so, you want to do time travel, that's where the more massive the object is that you're dealing with, maybe you can get to time travel through that. You can come up with your own mechanisms, but relativity is a neat one because it's not only about, the C is a constant speed, which there's not arguments over, but what is what is time? And especially the more massive, like once I leave Earth, my body is actually aging differently than it would be on Earth. So do the people in space live really long because they're in space? And it's the great story of you return home and everyone is gone. The Buck Rogers story, right? You wake, for him it was waking up, but in a relativity story, it could be about the time you come back, the whole world has changed. But I think it's another really interesting science rule to think about. Evolution, I like to think about a lot too. And it's really, everyone likes to think of evolution as the survival of the strongest. I like to think about it as the, what version, if you take two creatures, which one, that are just very, very similar, but a little differently, which one would survive better at that moment? It's not always what you would classically think of as stronger, but I think, when the term stronger is used, it really means in survivability when things are almost extinct, because it's an interesting thing with probability is the less things that you have, the more likelihood that it happen. If it happens, it will have an impact on a species. So, the rate of mutations are constant, but when something's almost wiped out, those mutations mean a lot more because the pool of creatures that are there is much smaller. Where like if you have 7 billion humans, you have a really cool mutation where someone can then pop out metal claws with healing factor and start digging through things. But the genetic mutation would then just be absorbed and disappear in all of the other people who've been around them. But, it's a neat one is, if you make big, massive changes, to a planet, what are the effects? What comes out of the creatures? Which is why on Earth you have extinction events every so often, and usually it's after an extinction event that the fossil record will start to show new species. Or like what appears to be a whole new species from what used to be an older, different type of species, where your flying dinosaurs turn into birds.
It cracks me up too, because we make such a big deal about a species going extinct. Not that I would like, to cause species to go extinct. Not that I think that it should be.
We should do our best to stop it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, we should do our best to stop, which is, allow me to be very clear. I don't think that it should be interfered with per se, but I do think that we should prevent our causing of it.
Yeah.
So let me very specifically state it that way, because there are more things on this planet that have gone extinct than live on the planet right now. So we have been through tons and tons and tons and tons of different species, and that's fine. World's still spinning. It's all right.
And essentially the extinction events are where, I'm going to throw out a number because I think it's a handful, like 5 times. It's probably not exactly that. So feel free to criticize me, but I'm going to ignore it.
I'm not trying to be I'm not trying to be, real world accurate here. I'm just approximating.
I'm approximating here.
Maybe
but, it's like 95%, of the life or more just is wiped out. Typically like from super like massive super volcanoes and massive meteors and things that cause huge impact changes. Apocalypse is like Michael and I have talked about, but all species. Apocalypse.
Yeah, plural.
Mm-hmm. And then what I always like to think about too is two variations on this. What if Mount Olympus was real and outside your window you could see it? How would the world be different?
Well, okay, but this is a rule approach.
A rule approach, right? Think of like pantheons, mythology. What if mythology was real? Not stories being allegorical, but real. Like literally, like Mount Olympus in Greece have the Greek gods with the powers they have and all of the myth stories that live on them. Rick Riordan does this in his books, really good middle school books. I enjoy them a lot, worth reading. But for him, it's like the kids are Greek heroes and they're typically related somehow to a Greek god. And because that's how all the Greek heroes were seared by a god,
I'm sorry, seared, burned, or sired, born?
Sired. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. It cracks me up sometimes when you'll enunciate something, and I'm like, okay, that means two different things if I didn't hear you correctly.
And both could happen to them.
Yes.
Maybe even by the same god. But it's like
depending on the day and their mood.
And the other version I think about too is what if everything about supernatural is like gods are all lies, but magic's available. Would people use magic to try and reinforce religions? And what are the repercussions? But you can say that hey, there are no actual gods in your world. Like in Gardul, there are a series of gods, but the people don't know the right names for them. They have their own names made for them, and the gods feed off of the worship so that they will present themselves in the way to get the most followers in a particular culture. And so the idea is they're trying to become more powerful in their species, and how they do that is by getting worshipers. And so which is sort of a middle ground. And then but you can have one where it's all lies, but you still have magic. So that is bubbling up from the earth's but not at the hands of the gods. What does that world look like though? And you can get really interesting questions with that one too. Is let's say you have the super mage like Razalin or a Gandalf. If they're sufficiently more powerful than the rest of the world, and the philosophical question you can have in a story is, what's the difference?
That's a good point.
So there's lots of different things that you could do when you start getting these rules there.
If you
big, like one question sentences I like to come up with, based off of relativity does not see the speed of light is not a constant. Okay, there's a lot of effects that you can then war game out. And these are all I use rules for is one, once they're established, it becomes a way to make sure I'm consistent, but also as an inspiration way to go in and make the world more interesting and come up with my own little unique changes to the world. And you know what? Out of the ones I've said, there are more. You can make up your own ones. These are just the ones I like to use. The next one's magic. Magic is rules in my world. I have a system for it, even if it's a story. To be consistent, I just it's not as complicated as like a role-playing system like Dungeons and Dragons or GURPS. But there is a system. There are things that have to happen, which produce consequences. And I like to know that.
I like how you say consequences as opposed to saying like the results of an input.
Sure. It's always a consequence, right? Because remember, one of the basic rules of my world is there's a cost to everything. Nothing's free.
Sounds like the man married to an economist.
And also I like to think too is, does magic act as a way to break the rules of nature, or did they reinforce it? If this kind of gets into almost mage-like magic, where it's like, are you actually breaking the rules of the universe by using magic, or are the rules of the universe is just a way certain people can tap into those, tap into the power of the universe in a different way than most people can? Like, I would have to build a machine by getting all of the parts, maybe even all of the raw materials to turn into parts to turn into a machine, where a mage could do the same thing quicker because he can pull it all together by saying whizzle-dee-doo.
Mm-hmm. I can't tell you how many times at work I've wished I'd had. I don't need like magic or all kinds of crazy. Just X-ray vision.
Yep.
Just X-ray vision, or not even like X-ray vision, but like X-ray, like vision, the way they portrayed Superman's X-ray vision in the original black and white television Superman, where he could just see through things.
Mm-hmm. Like the cutout of the wall would disappear and you could see the two crooks on the other side.
Well, for me, it would be the cutout of the wall would disappear and I could see how this wire is run, and the buried J box that no one knows is there because somebody buried it with sheetrock 15 years ago, and the only other person that knew is now dead. And and that's what I'm there to troubleshoot, and without that knowledge I can't troubleshoot. So.
Okay. And the last rule I want to talk about is technology. This is one I love to think about. And really all I do with this one is I look at what is the approximate time period equivalent on Earth. What were the kinds of things that they had? And then with magic, do they have all that same stuff? Does magic replace certain things, or does it replace all of it? How does magic impact it? But essentially, to me, I like to look at the deviations between Earth at a current time period. If you go to the Simply Succinct, was that the Simply Succinct? Was that technology?
I think it may have.
It may have been my Simply Succinct system.
Simply Succinct technology system.
I'll link that one.
It is a favorite around here.
Yeah. So I'll link that and some of the magic ones in this episode. But really, whenever you start adding the rules, then always look back to the other rules to see, do they play off of each other? Is there an intersection that I need to think about? Because it might end up rolling out either new rules or new effects on your world. Like, wow, I have high magic in my world. Do I need a blacksmith? Maybe not. It depends how magic works, right?
Mm-hmm.
It could become the artisans of the towns are mages. The farmer is a mage, the hunter is a mage, for me, the interesting story there is what happens when magic stops working. Kind of like, in our world, what happens when electricity stops working? Oh, boy, are we screwed.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, the Amish
Revolution did not get it good enough. I mean, they were very gentle with us.
I liked that show.
I liked that show. I watched, I think, the first season of it. Like I said, they were too gentle. They were way too gentle. At least in Western industrialized countries.
I also that was
would be completely unaffected.
That was a show that I both liked a lot and also had really big issues with, because they're trying to say, okay, this is, the real world. And then they do things that, like, what was it? There was no electricity for 15 or 20 years, something like that. It was at least 15.
There was like a switch or something, though. That's kind of when I stopped when they had would use it.
Here's the thing. It's like, okay, great, fine. Okay, they turn electricity on, but equipment that's been sitting for 15 years
doesn't turn back on.
It does not turn back on. If somebody has not been, softening the gaskets, if it hasn't been working so that those gaskets soften, if it hasn't been lubricated,
any rubber part is gone.
Anything rubber is gone. Anything plastic is beat up and brittle. Anything, that can oxidize has, unless it's in a very sealed environment. And even that at best still would not run well.
Yeah.
There's a reason that generators get turned on. Like if you have a commercial building with a backup generator, that generator kicks on every week. Every week it runs for 15 minutes. And if you don't do that, it's going to be useless.
And if you're in a data center in that building, you better test out what happens when the power goes out in that building, or else you might lose a data center.
Well, that's why we had ours in our because of our server room. And whoever spec'd it out originally, the AC was not suitable for the room. So we had an AC that was underpowered, and then we had like a subsidiary AC. And what would happen is, if the power was lost and we went to generator power, which happened a couple times, if things weren't set up a certain way, that room would get to like 95 over 100 degrees within 20 minutes because of all the heat coming off of the servers. And then it was an emergency, like a legit company emergency, because there's $500,000 worth of equipment in there, not to mention, incalculable amounts of data for clientele. Now it's all backed up on cloud, but when I first worked for the company, it wasn't.
Yeah.
So there were times, and the reason this was, a big deal for me, because my lab was the room you had to enter to get to the server room.
Which is also bad.
Which was also bad, because if something happened, then the server room would be wide open. They'd have a huge fan trying to jettison that hot air out, and it would just fill up the lab, and then we'd have the warehouse doors open. And it was a mess. It was a total mess until they kind of fixed it.
The last place I worked decided to put their move their server rooms and lots of servers to the flood zone on the shore in Connecticut.
Wow.
They had distributed offices all over the state, so then they'd have to pipe the data all the way up and relay it from Massachusetts back into the state to hit people in the northern part of the state, and way out west to hit the people in the west of the state.
So nobody in the IT department was like, "Hey, this is probably a really bad plan."
The IT department, I'm pretty sure, lost all of their suggestions on the data center that was picked by upper management there.
That's what kills me, is that so often I ran into this so much with the prior company I worked for, where the people who really knew what was going on had no decision-making power, and the people who did have decision-making power would not listen to the people that knew better.
Yep, and that's what happened, because I know there were in the requirements put together by the people who knew, one of the things was, you had a huge distribution. The largest distribution of workers was around the one part of the state. And so they're like, the data center needs to be within X number of miles of here. And then they moved it somewhere else where it happened to be, a possible flood place if you have storm surge, with the high tide. So good job there. And I'm sure it's a fortified building, and unless it's really bad, they'll be fine. But the thing is, you're risking a lot of infrastructure there, but now you have to mirror it all over, and you make your life a lot more complicated. So good job to all of the decision makers there who probably did it for other reasons.
This is all so on topic.
This is so on topic, because these are the kinds of things you have to think about when you world build. Where does your data center go, and how do you properly cool it? Now for the world building task of the day.
Oh, are we done? We're just... I didn't think we were done.
That is it. I mean, rules are simple, right?
I guess. Is there any other, go ahead. Is there any?
We can go into detail of all of these, but
I wasn't going to say that. I just didn't know if there was any other, overarching, rules for a rules episode, or rules for thinking.
Not that I can think of.
When you're making.
For me, it becomes more derivative from there, where you go in deeper into, especially magic if you're in fantasy, the science stuff if you're in science fiction, and you want to. Technology for either way, I think, is important. I think fantasy writers don't think enough about what the technology should be. And you can cheat and say we have better plate armor in, ancient times because of magic.
It's a sword. The pointy end goes into the other man.
It's the pointy bit. But yeah, no, I mean, the whole point is that rules are easy, but the benefits you get from them, are really the things that you're looking for. So for the world building task, just look at your world, look at those common things where you've deviated, and make sure you have a list of them somewhere. If you're creating a new project, start thinking about rules and go, do I want to change this? It could be one of the ones mentioned in the episode. It could be anything that you want to think about. Like, what happens if projectile weapons don't work? I had one person who had, what happens if you don't have, he had some sort of energy source was not available. How do things start to change? It doesn't necessarily have to be hard science. It can be soft science. Like, what happens if the ancient system of slavery in the world never became taboo? You think, in the world today on Earth, there's still slavery. And it's considered internationally, it's outlawed. Most countries, there are very strict laws against it. And you still have human trafficking. You still have actual open slavery in certain countries. Imagine if there were still more the ideas of like the ancient, like Mediterranean, or really anywhere, probably before 1500. Most places had slavery of some form. What happens if that just never goes away? And you get the rules where, well, the steam engine becomes a problem because you get excess people who no longer are doing work that they used to be doing. And you start playing with all kinds of things. And that's when I probably wouldn't want to touch the 10-foot pole, but you might. And for the real world task, this is what I like to think about occasionally as a parent. Sometimes when you get involved in rules, and maybe you heard the word rules and you kind of reeled back just a little bit. You're like, whoa, I don't know about these rules. I don't need no stinking rules. And that's very natural for me. I'm very anti being told what to do. And so
I think we're both rebellious by nature.
You don't understand. But the thing is, especially if you have little ones in your house, like obviously with me and my wife, I could make up all the rules I want to, and she's going to listen to exactly the ones that she wants to.
Which are none of the ones you make up, I assume.
If they're good ideas, she might go with it.
Yeah.
Do
you find this to be a problem sometimes, or
no?
I was going to say, I wouldn't think so.
No, she would just, slap me around. No, I'm joking. I'm joking to the audience there. But think about the rules that you come up with in your house and what effects do they really have? I'm sometimes overly philosophical and I like to think about things way too much, but if you've not noticed in the first 278 episodes here, but it's like when you add a rule to your house, like, okay, you can't have more than 10 toys. This to my son, right? You can't have more than 10 toys. What are the actual effects, And we've actually made changes over like how much stuff he has along the way. And we watch for the results of things because me and my wife are a little more data driven. And like, is it better or worse, for the people who live under the rules of the man and woman in my house? So, the thing about, like when you come up with the rules for your house, what are they like? How do they change your house? If you took away rules, how would your house be different? And this is somewhat intellectual exercise, or hopefully a real intellectual exercise, but it's like, it gets your brain starting to think about how, like you have to clean your room. If you take that away, what are the possible outcomes? Because, this is really the art of fictional storytelling, right? It's wargaming stuff out. And so this is a practical way where you can look at the rules you've come up with for your household and go, what happens if there's a radical change to those rules? Because that's where good stories come from. And really, if you can think of a way to, abstract it out to like a small country in a fantasy world, people identify really well with stories that they can identify with. And when it's based, off of structures that they know, off of names that they know, it can become more real for them. So I think that's one, if you sit the time to think about the consequence the rules have had in your house and what would it be like if you changed them, would be good for you as a world builder, and maybe, make your house a little bit, better place for the people who live there or visit. Like there's a no Michael rule in my house. No Mike.
Which is ironic because I get to go.
Well, he can only be called Mike in our household.
That's not true. Although
we both call you Mike.
I was going to say, I think you do.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, I'm pretty sure Kristen does.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's just how long we've known him. So
yeah.
That was a rule he added in, but did not enforce on the older friends, unless it's on a podcast.
Yeah, very few people actually get away with that.
It is funny though, because Kristen is one of the only other person who's ever corrected me when she was guest hosting an episode, and I said, "Oh, and Mike," and she's like, "No, Michael."
That's right. I forgot that.
So it's funny she would correct me on that. So, but
she's good like that. She got my back.
She's got your back, at least in that one. So I hope you all have a good day. We will see you next time. Thank you so much for listening to the World Builders Anvil.
We would love it if you would share the World Builders Anvil with 2 of your friends.
And so would they.
If they are unfamiliar with podcasts, then you get to introduce them to the wonderful world of podcasting.
Take them to Stitcher or iTunes, or best of all, just send them to our website, www.gardul.com.
That's GARDUL.com.
Now strike while the mithril's hot.